fresh from heart surgery, stitches still burning across my chest, I begged my daughter for water. In the $600,000 home I gave her, she folded her arms and shouted, "We are not your servants." My body trembled, but the betrayal cut deeper than pain. She thought she held the power. What she didn't know was this: one paper, signed years ago, could take back everything she thought was hers. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat quietly in the living room, the late afternoon sun cutting through the curtains, filling the space with long strips of gold and shadow. The chair beneath me creaked, the same chair I had owned for nearly 20 years, the fabric worn in places where Linda used to sit beside me. Everything about the room was familiar, yet it felt heavier now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on me. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the memories return, not because I wanted them, but because they refused to leave. I remembered writing check after check, almost $60,000 in total, so Emily could walk across the stage at her university graduation without a penny of debt on her back. I remembered the pride I felt as I clapped, my throat tight with tears, when she accepted her diploma. Back then, I thought the sacrifice was worth it. I even bought her a used Honda for $20,000 so she could commute safely to her first job. I could still see her standing in the driveway, jingling the keys in her hand, her face lit up with a smile that made every dollar seem like nothing. I had believed in her future more than I believed in my own. And yet, sitting here now, I wondered how those investments of love had curdled into the contempt she had shown me only days earlier. My mind drifted further back to the wedding she dreamed of. Emily wanted it grand, a day that would show the world how loved she was. And so I paid for it, every detail, nearly $25,000 when all was said and done. I can still remember my hands aching from laying bricks in the backyard, trying to make the garden picture perfect for the photographs. Linda had stood beside me, laughing as she trimmed the roses, saying it would all be worth it when we saw Emily in her white dress. The photographs are still there, tucked away in albums gathering dust, images of a smiling bride and groom, a proud father walking his daughter down the aisle. My pockets were lighter, but my heart had been full that day. I thought about how the music played late into the night, how I toasted to their future, promising them stability, support, and love. Now, years later, it felt like every toast I gave had turned bitter in my mouth. Every promise twisted into a rope that bound me to their endless expectations. But the wedding wasn't the greatest sacrifice. That came after Linda's death. I sat in this same room 5 years ago, holding paperwork from the insurance company in one hand and her death certificate in the other. $350,000. That was what her 20 years of careful planning, of paying monthly premiums, of worrying about my future and Emily's, had come to. I added $300,000 from my own savings, every dime I had scraped together over decades of work. Together, it was enough to buy this house outright, a house worth over $650,000 at the time. I told myself it was the right thing to do, to gift it to Emily and her husband Mark, to give them security after the storm of losing their mother. I signed the papers, had the deed transferred, and placed the keys into Emily's hand. Her tears that day had felt real. She whispered, "Dad, this is too much." But I told her family takes care of family. I believed that. I wanted her to feel safe. And in return, I believed I would always have a place here. But what once was a gift of love now feels like chains on my wrists, chains forged from my own generosity. The living room around me carried memories like ghosts. On the mantel sat the framed wedding picture of Linda and me, taken decades earlier. Her veil flowed across her shoulders, her smile wide and steady. I used to glance at that picture and feel warmth, but now it only filled me with a hollow ache. The hardwood floors beneath my feet, the ones I had installed myself after weeks of sanding and staining, creaked with every shift of my weight. I used to take pride in how the boards reflected the morning light, but now they mocked me with their silence. Even the scent of the old leather couch carried me back to nights when Emily was sick as a child, when I sat awake beside her bed, cooling her forehead with wet towels, whispering stories until she drifted back to sleep. Those memories are etched into the walls, into the air itself. Yet when I look at Emily now, I can no longer see that little girl with tangled hair and sleepy eyes. I see a stranger who treats me like an inconvenience, a burden, someone she barely tolerates in the home my money built. The shift inside me was slow, like a storm forming far off the coast. At first, there was disbelief. How could my own daughter shout those words at me? "We are not your servants." The phrase rattled in my chest, echoing louder than the beeping monitors I had just survived in the hospital. Then came the wound, raw and cutting, as if her voice had torn deeper than the surgeon's scalpel. After the hurt came the anger, sharp and cold, settling into my bones like winter frost. I turned my eyes toward Linda's photo on the mantel and whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Do you see this, Linda? Do you see what our gift has become? The house you thought would shelter our family has become my cage." The tears blurred my vision until her face became just colors and shapes, but the pain was sharper for it. That house was supposed to be a legacy of love. Now it feels like a tombstone I'm forced to live inside. I sat for a long time in that silence, but silence has a way of clarifying things. Slowly, a new realization settled over me, as steady as the dusk creeping across the floor. Perhaps I wasn't powerless. Perhaps there were things I had forgotten. I pulled open the drawer of the old oak desk that sat near the window. The hinges squeaked, just like they had the day I first placed them there. Inside was a folder, thick with documents I hadn't touched in years. The title deeds, the insurance paperwork, receipts from the very day I signed everything over. And there, tucked neatly inside, was the business card of David Parker, my attorney of nearly 2 decades. His voice echoed in my memory from the day he helped draft the transfer papers. "Will include standard reversionary clauses just in case circumstances change." Back then, I had barely listened, but now those words felt like a key in a locked door. I lifted the card, running my thumb over the embossed letters, and for the first time in days, I felt something stirring inside me other than despair. The air in the room seemed to shift. The weight on my chest didn't vanish, but it loosened just enough to allow a deeper breath. I looked around the living room again, really looked. The pictures on the wall, the furniture I had chosen, and the windows I had replaced after the storm 10 years ago. Every detail carried my mark, my effort, my sacrifices. This wasn't just a house. It was proof of my life, my work, my love. And I realized then that I was not about to surrender it to indifference, to entitlement, to betrayal. I leaned back in the chair, holding David Parker's card between my fingers, and whispered again, softer this time. "Maybe, Linda, I still have one move left." The clock on the wall ticked, steady and slow, but each second felt like a drumbeat pushing me toward something new. The betrayal was real, yes. The pain was sharp, yes. But so was the path forward. I was no longer just a man wounded by his daughter's words. I was a man who had built, who had given, and who still had the power to take back what was rightfully his. And as the last light of the evening stretched across the room, I realized with absolute clarity, this was not the end of my story. This was the beginning of my answer. I woke before dawn to the hum of the refrigerator and the small tick of the kitchen clock. Sleep had come in thin strips, never long enough to carry me into the deep. David Parker's card sat where I had left it, near the salt shaker, its raised letters catching the weak light. I traced my thumb across his name and told myself the truth. Knowing is one thing. Acting is another. Today, I would act. I would not let pain or habit or pride stall me a minute longer. I breathed in through my nose and let the air out slowly, the way the nurse showed me in the hospital. The scar tugged. It reminded me that life had tried to leave and had been asked to stay. I waited until a pale stripe of sun slid across the hallway. Emily's door was open. Mark's work boots sat by the entry, old and scuffed, the laces tucked inside like sleeping snakes. The television laughed from the living room, that canned laughter that fills silence and emptiness. I remembered standing by the sink yesterday, holding a glass that shook in my hand, and I felt the ache return in a clean line. Pain is a teacher. It speaks plainly. It tells you where the wound is. I walked into the room and cleared my throat. My voice sounded like a radio on a dying battery. I told Emily I could use a glass of water. I told Mark the ride home had taken more out of me than I expected. Maybe today would be different. People wake more softly sometimes. They remember themselves in the morning. Emily looked back over the couch without moving. Her face had the calm of a clerk reading a receipt. Mark did not look up. He pressed his thumb on the remote. The screen changed. I held my ground and asked again, quieter this time, because I hate begging, but I hate bitterness more. Emily said I should try the kitchen, since I knew where it was. She said walking was good for me. Mark added a line I will not forget. He says he acts like he's dying. He said it like a joke you tell before lunch. I stood very straight and counted a slow 5. I told myself to be a man I could respect tomorrow. I walked to the kitchen. Every step sent a bright wire through my chest. I steadied the glass under the faucet and watched the water climb. The sound of it felt too loud in the quiet house, as if the walls were listening to what we had become. I lifted the glass with both hands. I drank in small sips. It tasted like any water, and like no water I had ever swallowed. Sometimes ordinary things carry a weight you cannot see. I carried the glass back to my chair and lowered myself into it with care. I told them thank you, though they had done nothing. It came out by habit, the ghost of an older life. Emily turned the volume up one notch. Mark said the surgeon had told us walking would speed recovery. He said the first week was tough, but better if I moved around. I said I did not recall the surgeon telling them to ignore me. Mark laughed, a small, dry laugh. Emily said she had laundry to fold. They were done with me. I stared at the window until my breathing calmed. When they went upstairs, I stayed put. The house settled. The heater clicked. A delivery truck ground its way down the street, and the sound faded like a distant train. I stood and stretched my legs in the hall. Their voices drifted down the stairs, first a murmur, then a sharper thread, then words bright enough to cut. Emily said that if I kept bringing up the house, we needed to be ready. She said people believe what they hear first. She said we should tell the neighbors I had been confused since surgery. She said if I pushed the issue, they would talk about a facility. Mark said it would be easy. He said everyone knows older people get mixed up after anesthesia. He said Dad loses track of things. We're just looking out for him. Then he laughed. Emily laughed too, a short, clean sound, as if they had checked a box on a form. I shuffled back to my chair and sat down slowly. I adjusted the blanket on my knees so it would look like I had been fussing with it. Inside me, something cold and clear began to set. This was not heat. This was not a temper. This was a plan, and they had spoken of it the way you speak of groceries. They were going to take my name from me. They were going to turn me into a story people would nod at while they turned away. I thought about Mrs. Henderson with her tulips and kind hands. I thought about Joshua next door, careful, steady, the sort of neighbor who remembers your trash day when you forget. People believe calm voices and tidy lawns. I wrote a sentence in my head so I would not forget it. They are building a case. I will build mine. I opened the drawer of the end table and took out a small black notebook. Linda bought it for me years ago because she said I remembered numbers and forgot dates. I wrote the day and the time. I wrote the words I had just heard, not as a transcript, but as markers. Confused since surgery, talked to neighbors, facility, looking out for him. I wrote the line about everyone knowing that older people get mixed up. Then I added my own line. I wrote, I am not mixed up. I am healing. I underlined it. I closed my eyes and let the ink dry. I called David Parker. The first call went to voicemail. I did not leave a message. I wanted a voice, not a tone. I washed my face at the sink and dialed again. He answered with the steady calm that makes you feel you have already survived the worst. He said, "Peter, how are you holding up?" I told him I was tired and done pretending this was fine. He said, "Come in." He said he would be at the office within 30 minutes. I hung up and changed my shirt. I slipped Linda's locket into my pocket. It was warm from the drawer and warm from her memory. I wrote a note that said I was stepping out for a short errand. I did not say where. I locked the front door behind me and breathed the cold air all the way down. The drive to David's office took 10 minutes. I drove slowly, hands at 10 and 2, like I did the first week Emily learned to drive. Every bump announced itself to the line of stitches, but I welcomed the announcements. They kept me awake to what mattered. David's office sits in a brick building across from the courthouse. The lobby smells like paper and lemon. His receptionist greeted me with eyes that said, "Take your time." David met me at his door, shook my hand without squeezing, and pointed me to a soft chair. He poured water. He waited while I gathered my pieces. Then I spoke. I told him what had happened, clean and simple, the way I would read a meter or a blueprint. I spoke about the request for water. I spoke about the line, and he acts like he's dying. I spoke about the laughter upstairs and the plan to call me confused. I spoke about the house and what Linda's insurance had paid for, and how the gift had soured into something like rust. David listened like a man who had learned that listening is work. He did not interrupt. He did not offer comfort too early. He asked for the envelope. I had brought the deed packet with a rusted paperclip at one corner. He turned to a page I remembered, though I had not looked at it in years. He tapped a paragraph with the blunt end of his pen. He said, "This is what we put in place when you insisted on the transfer." He said, "We added conditions, not as a threat, but as a fence line. Care, respect, reasonable housing for you if needed. If the spirit of that agreement is broken, the property can revert." He said the law allows a notice to be filed. He said 30 days is standard, sometimes less if there is danger. He said judges look at patterns, not one bad day. He said, "So we will show the pattern." I asked him what proof would matter. He said dates. He made statements. He said witnesses. He said the plan to tell the neighbors I was confused would matter a great deal if repeated. He said any text, any note, any message where they minimize care would help. He said, "We are not here to humiliate your family. We are here to keep you safe in the home you bought." He asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him I wanted to move like a careful carpenter. Measure twice. Cut once. I said I would not run on anger. I would walk on truth. He printed a fresh copy of the clause and circled the lines that bore my hope. He wrote his cell number at the top and told me to call if my gut told me to call. He asked whether I had a place to go if the air in the house turned thin. I told him about Joshua next door. I told him about Mrs. Henderson. He nodded. He said neighbors can become the difference between stories and evidence. He asked whether I had duplicates of my important documents. I told him not yet. He said, "Make them." He said, "Do it today." I thanked him, not only for the law. The way his voice slowed my breathing. I stopped at the copy shop on the way home and made 2 sets. I mailed one to my post office box, the one I have kept since the year Linda started chemo, and we needed a safe place for bills. I put the second set in the glove compartment, wrapped in an old road map that still shows a diner that closed 15 years ago. I bought a pocket recorder, nothing fancy, just a small silver stick with a red button. I tested it in the car. My voice sounded older than I feel, but it was clear enough. I promised myself I would use it with care. It was not a trap. It was a witness. When I walked back into the house, the afternoon had settled. The television was still talking to itself. Emily asked whether I had enjoyed my little drive. Mark asked whether my doctor had cleared me to wander. I said I had gone to straighten out paperwork. I did not say what kind of paperwork. I set a grocery bag on the counter and made myself a sandwich, turkey on wheat with mustard, like Linda liked. My hands trembled a little when I held the knife. Strength returned bite by bite. Food is a small kind of courage. It tells your body to keep going. In the late afternoon, I sat at the dining table with the notebook. I wrote what David had said. I wrote what I planned to do and what I planned not to do. Ask plainly. Do not argue. Record refusals. Keep copies safe. Call if danger rises. I looked up at the mantel and met Linda's eyes in the photograph. I said out loud, "I will not fight dirty. I will tell the truth well." The sunlight slid across the floor and climbed the legs of the table. Time moved with a steady patience that I borrowed for myself. Near 5, Emily came into the kitchen to start dinner. She opened cabinets like a shopper. She sighed when a pan stuck to another pan. Mark tossed the mail onto the counter and asked whether the utility bill had gone up again. He said everything costs more. He said owning a house is expensive. I tasted the irony. I asked quietly if someone could please grab me a glass of ice water. My hands were still unsteady near the freezer drawer. Emily stood still long enough to make her point. She said she would do it later. Mark said, "Movement builds stamina." I nodded and let the quiet sit. Then I rose, walked to the freezer, and filled the glass myself. I wrote the time in my notebook and the word refusal. After dinner, I went to my room and closed the door. I set the recorder on the nightstand and looked at it for a long minute. I do not like living with devices. I like handshakes and plain words, but plain words had been bent and my handshake had been forgotten. I slid the recorder into my shirt pocket and told myself I would rather not need it. I lay back and breathed until the tightness in my chest eased. Their voices down the hall grew light, relaxed, easy. I know that sound. People relax when they think they have already won. I woke to the sound of the front door closing and paper bags crinkling. They had gone shopping and returned. I walked to the kitchen, wiped the counters, and sorted the mail. I put the legal copy in the drawer I could lock. Emily set a lamp on the table and said it would look perfect in the master bedroom. I looked at the price tag and said nothing. Mark pulled a takeout container from a bag and asked if I wanted any. I said I had already eaten. He shrugged. That was the whole story of his care in one motion. Later I asked if we could talk for a minute. I kept my voice even. I said I needed to feel safe recovering here. I said small acts of help mean more than they look. A glass of water is not about water. It is about whether we still know how to be family. Emily crossed her arms and looked at the floor like there was a message written there. She said I was trying to make her feel guilty. She said I was fine, walking, talking, breathing. She said the doctor had said movement was good. I told her the doctor had not said contempt was good. She let out a long breath through her nose. Mark said I was taking advantage. I said I was asking for kindness. We stood in our small triangle of air for a long 10 seconds. Then the moment passed, and the room returned to its old shape. Night brought a gray quiet. I could hear the old maple outside brush the siding. I thought about how that tree had doubled in width since we moved here. I have trimmed it every other year to keep the branches off the roofline. You can shape a tree with patience and tools. You cannot shape a grown child who refuses to look you in the eye. You can only set a boundary and hold it. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. Morning came with a thin fog and a steady calm. I made coffee strong and honest. I drank it slowly and felt the fog lift from my head as the window cleared. I reviewed my notes. The pattern was already there. Refusal, minimizing, a plan to call me confused, a plan to steer me toward a facility if I did not go quietly. I am not confused. I am healing. I am finished being ashamed of needing help for 1 week in a house I paid for. I spent the late morning gathering small things that matter when the big things wobble. I found the extra set of keys. I tucked cash into an envelope in case I needed a ride on short notice. I wrote Joshua's number and Mrs. Henderson's number on an index card and slid it behind David's card. I set a small overnight bag in the closet where I could reach it without bending. I am not a man who plans for drama. I am a man who plans for rain. In the afternoon, I practiced the voice I would use when I made my next request. I stood in the hall and said, "Could you please bring me a glass of water while you're up?" I said it again and let the silence sit after the last word. I practiced not filling the silence with apologies. When I felt ready, I stepped into the living room. They were both there. The television whispered a show where strangers argued for prize money. I waited for the commercial. I asked for water. I asked kindly. Emily's face did not change. She said, "Again." I said, "Yes, please." Mark said I was getting used to being waited on. His smile said he thought he had the joke and the high ground. I did not raise my voice. I said I wanted to feel like family in my own house. Emily lifted her phone and began to scroll. She said, "You have legs." I nodded. I walked to the freezer and filled the glass. I wrote the time and the word refusal and a second word, contempt. I drank the water and stood by the window for a long minute. The maple in the neighbor's yard shook the way a tired hand shakes. My hand shook less now. Today was not a defeat. It was a measure. The line was visible on the ground. I knew where I stood and where they stood. Knowing did not make the day easy, but it made the next day possible. I called David and told him what had happened. I kept it short. He said he would prepare a notice so it would be ready the moment I asked him to send it. He told me I did not have to act today or tomorrow. He said control is a kind of medicine when your body is learning its strength again. He said, "When you are ready, we will act." I said I would give it one more day. He said, "Then keep your notes and keep your peace." Evening came slowly. Emily lit a cinnamon candle. Mark turned down the lights and watched sports highlights from games he had not played. I sat in my chair and felt its cushion hold me like a steady hand. I thought about dignity. It is not loud. It does not push. It stands. It keeps standing. I am not perfect. I have been stubborn when a softer voice would have done. I have been quiet when I should have spoken sooner. I have also built and paid and stayed. Before bed, I opened the drawer again and touched the folder with the deed. I did not need to read the words to remember them. I have carried words all my life. I can carry these. I whispered to Linda that I would try once more. I told her I would make a simple request tomorrow where someone else could not pretend not to hear. I told her I would hold my ground without shouting. I told her I would be ready for whatever came. Morning will come. Morning always comes. And when it does, I will see clearly who my daughter is when the room is bright and the neighbors can hear. They think they have written the story. They think the ending is already in their pockets. They do not know what I know. I have the clause. I have the dates. I have the names. I have the quiet courage that grows when love has been wronged. I have what I need to protect the gift Linda left behind. I closed the notebook and set it on the table where my hand could find it without searching. I placed David's card on top like a small anchor. I breathed in and let the air out slowly until the ache in my chest loosened. I looked at the chair, the lamp, and the picture on the mantel. I said 3 words into the room so the walls could hear them. I am ready. Tomorrow I will give them one last chance to be the family they claim to be, and I will write down every word that tells the truth. I woke to a locked door and to the small, steady drum of my heart. The knob turned in my hand and stopped against the latch like a fist meeting a wall. I said my own name out loud to test my mind. It came out clear. The room was mine, the breath was mine, and the thought was mine. They had locked me in. I went to the window and lifted it as far as the old frame allowed. Cool air slid over my face. The yard lay below like a green rug with a hard border of concrete. 15 feet. Not impossible, but foolish after heart surgery. I scanned the fence line and saw Joshua next door, coiling his garden hose the way he always did, neat circles, slow and careful. "Joshua," I called, keeping my voice steady, like a man asking the time. "I need help." He looked up, shaded his eyes, and stepped closer to the fence. "Peter, you all right?" he said. I told him the door was locked from the outside, that my phone had been taken, and that I needed him to call the police. I chose each word like a tool I could trust. He nodded once and reached into his back pocket for his phone. "I'm calling now," he said. "Stay by the window." I sat on the edge of the bed and waited. The house settled in small size. Footsteps moved in the hall, then stopped. I heard the lift in Emily's voice, the practiced warmth. I heard Mark's lower tone, steady and managerial. I watched the hands of the clock cross 12 and then 3. I counted my breaths the way the nurse had taught me. Slow in, slower out. The stitches tugged. The anger tugged harder. I kept both where they belonged. A car idled out front, then a firm knock carried through the house. The bedroom lock clicked. The door swung wide, and Emily stood there with a face any camera would love, soft with concern, eyebrows lifted just enough. "Dad," she said, "are you dizzy again?" She reached for my elbow. Mark stood behind her with his arms loose at his sides and his mouth set in a reasonable expression. "I'm fine," I said. "The police are here." We walked to the living room together. 2 officers waited at the front door, a woman and a man, both wearing the calm of people who have seen more than one family forget itself. The woman introduced herself as Officer Ruiz, the man as Officer Bennett. Their eyes moved across the room, lingering on the photos over the mantel, the wedding portrait of Linda and me, the neat arrangement of chairs, the distance between our bodies. "What's going on tonight?" Officer Ruiz asked. Her tone was even, neither friendly nor harsh, like a level set on a shelf. Emily spoke before I could. "My dad's been confused since his surgery," she said. "We helped him rest. The bedroom door sticks sometimes." She held up my phone, the screen lit green, as if it had been rescued from neglect. "He left this in the kitchen. We plugged it in for him." I stepped forward. "I called my neighbor from the window because my door was locked from the outside," I said. My phone was in Mark's pocket. When I asked for it, he said no. Mark shook his head with a patient smile. "He's anxious," he said. "Anesthesia does that. The discharge papers said movement is good. We're trying to follow instructions." Officer Bennett asked about the date of my surgery. I told him. He asked about pain medication. I told him the dosage, the schedule, and that I understood my surroundings. He checked the bedroom doorknob. It turned easily now. He glanced at the phone in Emily's hand and then at me. "Do you feel safe right now, Mr. Richardson?" Officer Ruiz asked. I looked at Emily. I looked at Mark. I looked at Linda's picture. "I feel safer with my phone in my pocket," I said, "and with no locked doors." Emily put the phone in my hand with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Of course," she said. "We love him. He just gets turned around sometimes." The officers spoke to each of us in turn. They asked for calm. They explained they could not find a clear crime to act on. They told me to call if I felt unsafe. They told Emily and Mark to be patient and respectful. Then they left in the same quiet they had brought with them. The door closed. The house held its breath. Emily leaned close and spoke, so only I could hear. "See?" she whispered. "No one will believe you, Dad. Even the police think you're confused." Mark added a soft blade of his own. "Stop embarrassing yourself," he said. "You're just an old man living here because of us." If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I let the words hang where they could see them. I did not argue. I walked to my chair and sat down and stared at the photo of Linda until my breath matched the quiet rhythm of the house. Under my breath, I said one word, a word Linda liked because it saved fights from becoming fires. "Enough?" They drifted to the kitchen, drawers opened and shut. A faucet ran. Their voices turned light with relief, as if a test had been passed and the teacher had left the room. I took out my small black notebook, the one Linda bought, because she said I remembered amounts and forgot dates. I wrote the time. I wrote the 2 sentences exactly, like fence posts I could see even at night. Then I closed my bedroom door and called David Parker. He answered on the second ring with that even voice that feels like a hand held level with the horizon. I told him what had happened from start to finish. He did not interrupt. When I ran out of words, he supplied exactly enough. "It's time," he said. "Come in first thing. We'll prepare the notice. We will speak through paper." I slept badly and woke early. Dawn carried a thin band of silver across the floorboards I had installed with my own hands. I shaved, dressed, and slipped Linda's locket into my pocket. I put the deed packet, my notes, and my recorder in my bag. Then I drove to David's office, the brick building across from the courthouse, where power looks like ordinary paper. David had the document ready on heavy stock with a clean letterhead. The title ran like a bell through the quiet room. Notice of gift revocation and demand to vacate. Beneath it, my name. Beneath that, Emily's full name and mark are in a separate paragraph. The legal description of the property. The clause we had circled in the past, care, respect, reasonable housing if needed, now spoke in the present tense. The grounds were listed plainly: hostile treatment of the grantor, failure to provide reasonable care during medical recovery, deliberate confinement against the grantor's will, and repeated attempts to portray the grantor as mentally confused to avoid obligations. The language was firm, not cruel. That made it stronger. David slid a short cover letter across the desk, written in my voice and edited by his hand. I read the first lines aloud to test them. "I gave you this home, believing family protects family. By your actions, you have broken that promise. Under the terms of the deed, your right to occupy has ended." The words did not tremble on my tongue. I signed where he pointed. He notarized the signature. Then he set the packet aside and looked me in the eye. "After service," he said, "do not argue. Refer them to me. If anyone threatens you, call 911 and then call me. The paper will do the talking." I nodded. I felt taller in my chair without moving an inch. On the way home, I rehearsed my quiet. My job would be to stand still while the documents walked. The driveway held Mark's truck and Emily's car. The house looked like any house from the street, which is how most storms look to strangers. I set my bag on the entry table and sat by the front window with a view of the sidewalk. I waited for the knock that would turn a week into a line. A process server arrived near 3, a woman in a navy blazer with eyes that had seen 1,000 doors. She confirmed the address with me, then rang the bell. Emily opened the door with her polite face on. The woman checked names, handed out 2 envelopes, and said 4 words that sound simple until they're addressed to you. "You've been served, ma'am." Emily closed the door slowly, as if quiet could make the words untrue. She held both envelopes like they might bite. "Mark," she called, voice thin. He came from the hallway, drying his hands on a towel, the rhythm easy at first, then tight when he saw the paper. He tore his envelope open with a grin that faded by the second paragraph. The color drained from his cheeks. His shoulders dropped an inch. He read the second page twice, then lifted his eyes to me. "What is this?" "It's the truth," I said. He jabbed the page with his finger. "You can't do this. This is our home." "This has been my home," I answered, "paid with Linda's life insurance and my savings, given to you on a promise you broke. The deed allows me to revoke. I have revoked. You have 72 hours to leave." Emily stared at the notary seal like it might be fake. "We were helping you," she said. "You were upset. The door sticks." "You locked me in," I said. "You hid my phone. You told the police I was confused because I asked for respect. That is not helpful." She tried to soften what could not be softened. "Dad, please, you just had surgery. We said some things we didn't mean. We can fix this." Mark chose a different road. He stepped closer, trying to fill the room with height. "You're not putting us on the street in 3 days," he said. "Not happening." I stayed seated. "Call the number on the letter," I said. "All questions go to counsel. Any threat confirms the decision." There is a sound people make when the floor opens under them. It is not a word. It is a thin break in the breath. I heard it in Emily then, just a small crack in the air. She took the papers to the kitchen and called the number at the bottom. Her voice carried through the house, bright at first, then brittle. "Mr. Parker, "This is Emily. We just received a notice. There must be a mistake." I did not listen to every word. I did not need to. I knew David's steady cadence by heart. He would tell her the timeline, the terms, and the consequences of refusal. He would explain the reversionary clause the way a teacher explains gravity. By the time she hung up, the shape of her face had changed. She was no longer acting. She was realizing. They came back into the living room with the look of people who had been told the ocean is higher than their porch. Mark sat on the couch and stared at the floorboards I had laid. "What do you want?" he asked. It came out both hard and hollow. "I want peace in the home Linda's money built," I said. "I want honor where there has been contempt. Since you won't give those, I'll take back the rest." Emily began to cry for real then, not the angry kind, the shocked kind. "I didn't know you could take it back," she said. "I didn't know there was a clause." "Not knowing did not stop you from locking my door," I said. "Ignorance is not shelter." We sat like that for a long minute. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside and kept going. I felt steady, like a level line across a page. I had been waiting all week to feel that way again. Joshua knocked gently to ask if I needed anything. I thanked him through the door and said it was handled. He said he was around if I needed a witness for anything official. The words landed like a wedge under a heavy door. I breathed easier. That night brought the sound of tape pulled from a roll. Boxes opened their cardboard mouths and ate up closets. Mark paced in the garage and made phone calls in a low voice. I wrote down the names I recognized and the times I heard them. Not to punish, to remember. A record is mercy for a tired mind. Morning brought a text from David. "Proof of service filed. Document everything." "Hold steady," he wrote. I ate oatmeal at the old table and told Linda photo my plan. Coffee, paperwork, and a few repairs. She always liked lists. By noon, Emily called again from the kitchen with her polite voice rebuilt around a crack. She asked if I would consider 90 days. I told her to speak to David. She asked if she could keep certain pieces of furniture. I told her to speak to David. She asked if there was anything at all, that could change my mind. "Leave on time," I said. "Leave with dignity." Mark tried a different angle. He came into the living room with numbers. Rent is high. Moving is expensive. We are family. He ended with a small threat wrapped in worry. He said I would die alone. I told him loneliness is living in a house where respect has moved out. He did not have a number for that. He left the room and shut the door like a period at the end of a wrong sentence. I printed a short notice and taped it to the inside of the front door and to the refrigerator. It had 3 lines. The notice has been served. 72 hours remain in effect. All communication goes through counsel. I initialed the bottom. It kept me from softening at midnight. On the second evening, Emily came to me with eyes that looked 10 years younger and a posture that looked 10 years older. She asked if I hated her. The truth was simple. "No," I said. "I hate what you did. I will not live inside it." She nodded in a way that told me the sentence had landed somewhere useful, maybe not today, maybe not soon, but someday. Mark stayed up past midnight reading landlord forums, mistaken about which fight this was. He spoke aloud to the screen as if that could bend a statute. This was not a lease dispute. This was a gift revoked by the terms of the gift. A promise is revoked by the breaking of the promise. He slammed the garage door once. The house shook. Then the calm returned and stayed. On the third day, just before noon, the last switch flipped. The rooms looked bigger. Sound has size, and theirs had been taken away by cardboard and tape. Emily stood in the doorway holding a ring of keys that had felt like a future when I first dropped them into her palm. Her face was pale from sleeplessness. Mark stood behind her, smaller than he had been a week ago. "We'll go," she said, "but you'll regret this when you need us." "I needed you," I said, "when I asked for a glass of water in the house I bought. I needed you when you locked my door. I needed you when you told the police I was confused. I will not regret choosing peace." She put the keys in my hand. The metal was warm from her skin and heavy with all the days between the gift and the taking back. They carried the last box to the car. The maple moved in a gentle wind. A dog barked down the block. Ordinary life kept its pace. Mark closed the trunk with care I had not seen from him in weeks. Emily looked at the front door, then at me. A question was there, about love, about boundaries, about what survives. I let it be her question. They drove away. I stood on the porch and let the quiet come back. It did not rush. It arrived like a tide, slow and sure. Inside, the rooms breathed. I walked to the mantel and touched the frame of Linda's photo. "We're okay," I told her. "We're finally okay." The house seemed to accept the words. The air felt wider. I called David and told him they were gone. He filed the follow-up and sent a locksmith. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Tired," I said, "the good kind." New locks clicked into place with a clean sound. I made tea, opened the windows, and let the house breathe. Feeling that kind of dismissal and injustice is hard, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves justice, comment the word justice. Now watch what they choose next and how I choose peace. I sat alone in the living room on the first morning after the papers had been served. The light slanted through the curtains in the same way it had for years, but the house sounded different now. It breathed again, as if some weight had been lifted from its walls. I heard boxes scraping against the hardwood upstairs, the shuffle of Emily's footsteps, the low thud of Mark dropping something too heavy into a bag. The noises should have hurt me. Instead, they sounded like justice moving through wood and plaster, pushing the air clean. David Parker had filed the official notice, stamped and recorded in the county office, and for the first time in weeks, I could exhale without fear that my words would be twisted. The deed no longer lived in Emily and Mark's hands. It had come back home to me. The legal language was sharp and cold, but behind each line I heard Linda's voice reminding me that promises matter. I had built this house on her trust, on her life insurance, on the sweat of years, and now it was mine again, not because of possession, but because of principle. When I walked past the mantel, my eyes fell on the wedding photo of Linda and me, the one Emily used to stop and touch when she was a girl. She would ask, "Did Mom really wear that lace veil?" And Linda would laugh, saying, "Yes, it itched like crazy, but it was worth it." That same daughter now packed her life into boxes, ready to leave the house her mother's death had paid for. I whispered into the air, "Linda, I hope you see this. I hope you know I kept my word." A warmth spread across my chest, lighter than the ache of my healing scar. I wanted to believe she was still here, standing guard, smiling that patient smile. By the second afternoon, the house grew louder. Mark's frustration had boiled over. He slammed doors, cursed under his breath, and made phone calls to friends I didn't recognize. I heard him say, "We're being kicked out. Can you believe this?" I heard the silence that followed, the silence of people unwilling to take sides against a legal document with a seal. His words, once sharp with arrogance, now carried the sound of a man no one believed. That was its own kind of punishment, one I didn't have to deliver. Emily was quieter. She moved more slowly, as if each piece of clothing, each dish she wrapped, carried a memory too heavy to fold. At one point, she stopped at the bottom of the stairs, holding Linda's old quilt, the one stitched with squares of faded blue. Her face broke, and she dropped into a chair, covering her eyes with both hands. Her voice cracked like dry wood. "I didn't know, Dad. I didn't know the house came from Mom's insurance." She sobbed, the kind of sob that shakes the whole body. I wanted to reach for her. I wanted to comfort her the way I had when she was a little girl, afraid of thunderstorms. But I stayed where I was. Compassion is not the same as forgetting. Tears cannot erase betrayal. I said only one sentence. "You did know she trusted you." Emily's eyes met mine, wet and pleading, but the truth sat between us, too large to move. She looked down and whispered, "I'm sorry." But it was late, too late, and apologies cannot rebuild walls once the foundation has cracked. By the end of the third day, the rooms began to empty. The guest room, once crowded with laughter at Christmas, now echoed. The upstairs bathroom shelves were bare, toothpaste rings left behind like faint shadows. The kitchen counters cleared one by one until only the fruit bowl and the coffee maker remained. It felt like watching a storm pull back from the shore, leaving debris behind, but also leaving clean sand ready for the tide to start over. When they carried the last box to the truck, Emily handed me a small set of keys, the ones I had given her years ago in a little wooden box Linda had decorated with ribbons. She placed them in my palm with shaking fingers. "Please don't hate me," she said. Her eyes searched my face for something I could not give. "I don't hate you," I told her. "I hate the choices you made." My voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Truth has its own weight. She nodded, tears dripping onto her sweater, and turned away. Mark said nothing. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff, his eyes refusing to meet mine. He muttered something under his breath as he closed the trunk, but the sound was too faint to matter. They drove away without another word, the red tail lights fading at the corner. When the street fell silent again, I stood on the porch with the keys still warm in my hand. The house looked back at me as if asking what kind of life we would share now. I breathed deep, the air crisp with the scent of fresh rain, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. I stepped inside and locked the door. The click of the new lock sounded like a hymn. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The days that followed were quiet but not empty. I cleaned each room, not as a chore, but as a reclaiming. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until they shone. I polished the wooden banister that had held Linda's hand when she climbed the stairs. I sat at the table with coffee and watched the morning sun creep across the floorboards I had nailed down myself. Each ordinary task was a declaration. I am still here, this house is mine, and I am not broken. David stopped by with the final confirmation. The title had reverted. The paperwork was ironclad. "You did it," he said, shaking my hand gently. "You held the line." I thanked him not only for his work, but for his calm, his steady presence when my world tilted. He left me with one last piece of advice. "Live in it now, Peter. Don't live in the fight. It's over." I promised him I would try. Word spread quickly. In a town this size, it always does. I noticed the way neighbors looked at me, some with sympathy, some with quiet respect. Joshua mowed his lawn and waved, no pity in his eyes, just a kind of salute. Mrs. Henderson left a pie on my porch with a note that said, "Proud of you for standing up." Even the mailman paused one morning, tipping his cap with a simple, "Good for you." These small gestures built me back piece by piece. They reminded me that I was not alone, that community could stitch together the tears family had left. Meanwhile, I heard bits of news about Emily and Mark. They had rented a small apartment on the other side of town, a 1-bedroom walk-up near the highway. Mark had lost hours at work, and his friends, who once crowded the porch for barbecues, no longer came around. Emily tried reaching out once, a short text that said, "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it without replying. Some doors are not meant to be reopened. My boundary was not cruelty, it was survival. Nights were the hardest at first. The silence pressed in, heavy with absence. But slowly, that silence became a friend. I filled it with old records Linda loved, with the sound of pages turning, with the crackle of logs in the fireplace. I even began walking in the park again, where the air smelled of pine, and the benches remembered my weight. One evening, as the sun dropped low, I whispered to myself, "I don't need them anymore. I have me." Saying it out loud made it true. The greatest gift was the return of my own dignity. For too long, I had let their contempt shape how I saw myself. They treated me as a burden, and I almost believed it. But standing alone in the house, with the light on the mantel and Linda's picture watching over me, I knew the truth. I was not weak. I was not finished. I was a man who had built, who had given, and who had finally chosen himself when others betrayed him. That knowledge filled me with a freedom no money could buy. Looking back, the lesson was sharp but necessary. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who honor your worth. Linda had known it, and now I knew it too. Emily and Mark had lost more than a house. They had lost my trust, and without trust, walls are just walls. They were gone, and I remained, stronger for the breaking. I sat one evening with a cup of tea by the window, watching the last leaves of autumn fall across the lawn. I spoke softly, not to the room, but to the space where Linda still lived in my heart. "We did it," I said. "We kept the promise. They cannot take that from us." My reflection in the glass looked back at me, lined with age but alive with peace. I realized then that the betrayal, as painful as it was, had given me something unexpected. It had stripped away illusion. It had forced me to see what truly mattered: self-respect, boundaries, truth, the things no one can steal unless you hand them over. I had nearly given them away, but I had taken them back. That was the victory. That was the real inheritance Linda had left me. The house will not be mine forever. Someday it will belong to another family, perhaps strangers, who will never know this story. But for now it is my sanctuary, a place of survival, of memory, of quiet mornings and honest nights. I no longer fear its emptiness. Emptiness can be filled with peace, and I am learning to fill it day by day. I know Emily may try again someday. She may write a letter or call from across the years. But I will hold my ground. I will not let guilt erase truth. The door will remain closed unless respect comes first. I cannot raise her again. I cannot fix what she broke. All I can do is protect the man I still am. As I closed my notebook that night, the one filled with dates and words like fence posts across this whole storm, I thought of the final lesson Linda would have wanted me to learn. Life is too short to live in betrayal. Better to live in a small circle of honesty than a large circle of lies. I smiled because I finally understood. I am free. I am whole. And I am enough. Some nights I light a candle and sit on the porch, listening to the crickets and the faraway hum of cars. The flame flickers, fragile but steady, just like me. I think about tomorrow, not with fear, but with a quiet readiness. Tomorrow I will keep walking. Tomorrow I will keep living. Tomorrow I will begin something new. Maybe I'll join the community group Joshua told me about. Maybe I'll volunteer at the library. There's a life waiting, and it is mine to choose. And as I stepped inside that night, closing the door on the past, I whispered one last truth that carried me forward. Family doesn't end in blood. It begins with respect. And respect begins with me. I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window, something I hadn't really noticed in years. The house felt different now, quiet in a way that no longer carried the weight of absence. It wasn't the silence of betrayal anymore. It was the silence of peace. I spent that first morning putting the house back together, not just physically, but in my own heart. I dusted the mantel and placed Linda's picture in the center again, her smile catching the soft light of dawn. For months I had avoided that photograph, too pained to face her eyes. Now I felt her presence not as a wound, but as a comfort. "I kept your promise, Linda," I whispered, my hand brushing over the frame. "This house stands for us again." Each day brought a new rhythm. I opened windows to let in the cool air, I tended to the small patch of grass out front, and I rearranged the furniture so the rooms finally felt like mine. I even polished the old oak table where Linda and I had shared countless meals, running my hand over the grooves and scratches that told our story. Every corner carried memory, but instead of suffocating me, they reminded me that I had lived a life full of love, sacrifice, and endurance. That reminder became my anchor. I no longer felt the sting of being discarded by my own daughter. I felt the steady ground of knowing I had chosen dignity over despair. Still, I knew I needed more than walls to carry me forward. I needed community. So I joined a group at the church, one that visited elderly neighbors who had no family nearby. At first, I wasn't sure if I could give comfort when my own wounds were still raw. But the first time I sat with Mr. Allen, a veteran in his 80s who told me about the wife he lost, I realized something profound. In his story, I heard echoes of my own. In his loneliness, I saw pieces of myself. And when he smiled and said, "Thank you for listening," I felt stronger than I had in years. Service has a way of patching holes in your heart without you even realizing it. Week by week, I kept going back, and each visit stitched me back together. Then came the letter. It arrived in an envelope with handwriting I knew instantly. Emily's. For a moment, I couldn't move. I stared at my name written by the daughter I had once held in my arms, the daughter who had stood against me. With trembling hands, I opened it. The words inside were messy, rushed, filled with apologies. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was wrong. Please forgive me." Tears fell on the paper, but they weren't mine. They were hers, staining the page in circles that blurred the ink. I sat in silence, the letter heavy in my hand. For a moment, I considered writing back. But then a thought rose inside me, firm and clear. I didn't need her apology to heal. I had already chosen peace, and peace didn't require permission from those who broke me. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and whispered to myself, "I don't need their apology. I have my peace." A few months later, I made another decision. I sold the house. It wasn't about escape. It was about closing a chapter. I bought a small cabin just outside town, a modest place worth around $200,000. It sat at the edge of a forest, where the mornings smelled of pine and the evenings glowed with fireflies. The cabin had a garden out back, and I planted tomatoes, peppers, and wildflowers. Each seed felt like a promise, each sprout a small victory. I spent afternoons reading on the porch, the sunlight warming my shoulders. I spent evenings cooking simple meals, the kind Linda used to love. Life slowed down, not because I was old, but because I had finally allowed it to. And in that slowness, I found freedom. I often thought about Emily and Mark. I heard they had moved into a small apartment near the highway, a cramped one-bedroom they could barely afford. Mark had lost friends and job opportunities, his pride finally costing him more than he could manage. Emily tried reaching out again through another letter, but I left it unopened this time. They were living with the consequences of their choices. I didn't celebrate their struggle, but I accepted it as justice. Actions have weight, and they had finally felt the heaviness of theirs. Meanwhile, I lived lighter. The contrast between our lives was striking. They had lost respect, community, and comfort. I had gained all three back. Sitting in my cabin one evening, I began to reflect on the lessons this painful journey had carved into me. For parents, the message is simple but hard. Don't sacrifice every boundary for your children. Love them, yes. Support them, yes. But never hand them the keys to your dignity. A parent's love should be a gift, not a blank check to be cashed without respect. For children, the lesson is just as sharp. Love is not property, and sacrifice is not an inheritance to be looted. To betray the hands that raised you is to burn the bridge you will one day need to cross. And for all of us, in this modern world, the truth is clear. Money fades, houses crumble, but character endures. In a society where greed often drowns out gratitude, the most lasting wealth is integrity. One small moment brought these lessons into focus for me. While cleaning the cabin, I found an old box I hadn't opened in years. Inside was Linda's wedding ring, wrapped in a cloth she had embroidered with her initials. I held it up to the light, watching the gold catch the sun. My chest tightened, but not with sorrow, with gratitude. This ring was not just a symbol of our marriage. It was a reminder of promises kept, of respect shared, of the values that should have guided our daughter too. I sat by the window holding that ring, whispering, "I kept your promise, Linda." And I finally found peace. The words left my lips with the ease of truth, a truth I had fought long to reach. Now my days are steady. I wake early, I water the garden, and I share coffee with neighbors who visit. On Sundays, I volunteer at the church. Sometimes I walk through the park and sit on a bench just to watch the world move around me. Each moment feels like a reward, not because it's extraordinary, but because it's honest. I no longer carry the weight of betrayal. I carry only myself, and that is enough. I know Emily may try again someday. She may appear on my porch or call when life feels too heavy. But I have already made my choice. Respect is the price of a relationship, and without it, the door stays closed. I don't say this with anger. I say it with clarity. Self-respect is not negotiable. That is the final boundary, the one that keeps me whole. As I write these last words tonight, the cabin is quiet. The fire crackles softly in the hearth. The air outside is cool and clean. I sit by the window with Linda's ring in my palm, my heart calm, my soul steady. I have walked through betrayal, through injustice, through loneliness, and I have come out standing. My journey has taught me that family is not simply blood. Family is respect, love, and truth. Without those, the title means nothing. With them, even strangers can become kin. I have peace now, real peace, and that is worth more than any house, any sum of money, any inheritance. That is my final inheritance to myself, and perhaps to those willing to listen. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.